Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
In this episode, Economics 101. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
This episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about economics in your RPGs. Not just Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, but actually any RPG, whether it's fantasy, Old West, sci-fi, horror, whatever.
A huge component of most games is selling loot, gathering loot, and then purchasing other items with the money that you get from selling that loot. You know, that's a huge component of just about every game I've ever played. You gather things up, you harvest things, you kill baddies, you take their loot, you go to the nearest settlement or whatever to sell. You get more money so that you can buy other things and upgrade your own armor or weapons.
Right. One thing that I found is players kind of get upset when they pick up all this loot and then they expect a 100% payout for the item. You know, they pick up a longsword or a suit of armor and they expect what the book says that the value of that item is. Instead, you know, they might get 50% or even lower.
Yeah, and it even says that in a lot of the games. One of the games I played quite a bit is Skyrim, and you'll pick up a sword that'll say it's worth 10,000 gold, and you're like, 10,000 gold, I've got it made. Yet most of the vendors only have about 1,000, and they're only willing to give you about 1,000 gold. So that's about all you get from it. You know, so that's one of the realities of the economy of the area, but also the fact that not anybody wants to give you something, you know, for something that may not really be worth it to them.
Right. It's like buying your car and driving it off the lot, taking it to another car dealership and expecting the same price that you just paid for it or more for that same car, when we know that it, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it depreciates at least 20%.
Exactly, because it's not new anymore.
Right. So basically the same thing works in RPGs.
Yeah, so let's start with goods and services that you would have in villages, all right? So availability of goods and services. Now, Delaney brings up an example quite often about armor and weapons. Everybody in the D&D world, Pathfinder world, role-playing, fantasy role-playing world, wants to have the best armor and weapons they can so they can take on the baddies. Okay? They want to have that sword of doom. You want to have the shield of protection. You want to have the armor of the morning.
The never-ending potion of healing.
Exactly. You want to have those wands and things. Now, magic items is a whole other area, which we'll talk about. But let's just talk about arms and armor. So, unless you're hanging around the castle where the castle blacksmith is, who makes arms and armor for the king or his lords, even in a fantasy world, and certainly in the reality of the medieval world, it was very difficult to come across quality-made items out in the hinterlands. Just truly, unless you found some old tomb where they had buried a knight. Okay, which you can make that part of your gameplay, but you know, for people to expect, you know, right away, players right away to have this armor, that weapon, is pretty unrealistic, to be honest.
Right.
You know, for one thing, they're expensive. Really expensive.
Right. It's said that a suit of armor and a sword would be like buying like a Maserati or a Lamborghini in today's world.
Yeah, exactly. Everything was made by hand. Okay? All weapons, pieces of armor, custom made by hand.
Was it made overnight?
Wasn't made overnight. It could take months to make a suit of armor. It could make months to make even parts of armor.
Yeah.
So, in order for a craftsperson to dedicate that much time to one piece, they're going to charge you a lot of money for it, you know, and you just can't have it the moment you show up in the village. You know, here you are in the village of Greenbrier. well, all I have is this leather armor that my dad made me. We're going after those trolls. Don't you think I better pick up a sword? Is there an armor smith in town? Oh, yeah, there's an armor smith down by the bridge. So you go down to the bridge and they're like, hey, it's a dwarf. You know, what? Ching, ching, ching. What do you want? Rah. Hey, I need to get a better sword. Yeah, sword? I got a couple on the wall. And he points to some rusty old relics. And you're like, well, something better than that. Well, that's all I got. I mean, what do you want? You know, and you're like, hey, what are you working on? That looks like a pretty good sword. This is a sword for the king. You can't have that. Well, that's the reality. Okay.
Right. Well, so, can you make me a sword overnight? No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, dwarves can be clever, but they're not. You know, it's the reality is they're not going to be pounding away on a sword overnight. It takes a long time.
Especially, you know, there's a show that we like to watch called Forged in Fire.
Yeah.
And these people, you know, they make a knife in 3 hours, and most of it looks pretty primitive, and then they might get 4 days to make a sword or an axe or something, and they're trying to make the best they can.
With modern tools, we're talking power hammers, availability of the best steels,
right,
and grinders and everything else. Now, back then, quite often, a smithy would have to make their own ore, would have to make their own slag metal from ore that they had gathered, or they would, you know, gather up raw iron that they would have to somehow convert into a weapon. You know, even if you were trying to make a weapon out of steel, which is very, very rare, okay, it would take you weeks to do it.
Right.
You know.
And then you got to get into the law of supply and demand.
Yeah.
I mean, that is basic economics that we all learn in high school.
Yeah.
The law of supply and demand.
Yeah.
What is needed is going to cost you more than what's not needed.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or luxury items are even going to be more.
Well, luxury items would be astronomical. Okay,
Yeah.
A fine pair of gentleman's gloves might cost a glover. You know, might make you a fine pair of gentleman's gloves or a gentle lady's gloves. It might take them a week or more to sew, and they're going to charge you a pretty penny for that.
Yeah.
Because they're a fine pair of gentleman's gloves. You just want some old mitts to put over your hand when you're out in the field. You could probably make those yourselves or have your grandma make them.
Yeah.
They're not going to be that much money. Okay, so one of the misconceptions I think that people have is when they walk into these, you know, villages, you know, oh, I just need to get this fine item. It's got to be here somewhere. It's like, well, maybe not. I mean, the peasants here, it's pretty primitive. They may not have everything you want.
Yeah.
Right? And if you do find something really, really fine, it might be a family heirloom or something of the sort, and they may not want to turn loose of it.
Yeah. If you're really lucky, maybe it was something that somebody sold to the guy not knowing, and he doesn't know, and so he turns it around and sells it back to you, but he's still going to charge you just like a pawn shop.
Yeah.
It's going to overcharge you for what you pay for.
Sure. Now there are, and we have to bring up, I suppose, like barter.
Right.
Okay, because basic items and needs that people would have, you know, often was met by the barter system. Whereas if you were a brewer and you had beer, you would basically barter it to the miller for grain, or the person who's making clothing, or someone who's making pottery,
right,
that sort of thing. Those were actual exchange rates back and forth. Now, one of the things that villagers, and we know this from history, what the things that they avoided quite often was trying to keep from using coinage that might have been debased, meaning that some clever treasurer of the king decided that they weren't going to put a lot of silver into this coin, they were going to put a lot of lead into this coin. And all of a sudden, when they started weighing them out, they're too heavy, and it's like, this stuff's more lead than silver, it's worth nothing. Or what things that they used to do where they would clip the edges of coins and stuff like that, where it's actually not the weight that it's supposed to be. And, you know, this whole concept of it's kind of like cheating people when it comes to the actual value. So if you've got a tangible hard good like beer, wine, cloth,
furs,
leather, iron, like bars of iron, well, that kind of stuff is tangible. It has a worth according to what people are willing to pay for them and trade for them. So a lot of times basic economies are set up that way. And we've come across that in our worlds where we've had, you know, our economic trade quite often, where Delaney will run sort of an economic system where basically, you know, if you go into a village, you have something to trade. A lot of times it's a lot more realistic than walking around with 50 gold pieces in your pouch, because most people didn't have 50 gold pieces, and if you showed up with 50 gold pieces in a village, they would figure you were either a thief or some kind of an assassin. Who else is going to have that kind of money?
And you may crash the economy in the area with that kind of money.
Exactly. They're not used to that. You have hyperinflation economy.
Right. You got to talk, too, about the size of where you're trying to buy something, whether it's a hamlet or a city, and then the distance from those little villages from maybe a major city or a major farming community that might have the items.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to look at the distance. Once again, it's law of supply and demand.
Yeah, transportation costs between cities, between towns, between the sea coasts, between over the oceans. And we know that a lot, just in our world, we know that a lot of ships that left the New World never made it back. All right, and a lot of people lost their investments in those ships. And all those goods, you know, are laying at the bottom of the sea. There's thousands and thousands of shipwrecks that they never made it back.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah. And so that in itself could economically ruin a person, a company, a group of people. It might even ruin a whole city.
A governor.
Yeah. If the ships don't come in, because everyone's put money into it and it sank, and now everybody's out. So that's part of the economic reality. And the thing is, of course, stuff like that can be worked into your gameplay, you know, as part of your storyline.
Right, right. Trading things for, you know, other tangible goods.
Right.
You know, hey, I've got this nice dagger. Can I trade it for some food? Well, yeah, I could use this. I could trade this dagger off to somebody.
Sure. That's a tangible good, as opposed to I have this debased coinage, which you don't really know what it's worth. You know, can I buy some expensive clothing, or can I buy a horse with it? And everybody's like, well, I don't know anything about that coin. It looks like something I've never seen before. Why don't you have something tangible? You know,
right? It would be kind of like the Confederate dollar in the North, or a dollar from, say, Virginia going down to Georgia during the Civil War.
Yeah.
You know, it all changes by location and the value. So paper has no real value, but gold, if it's pure, and a lot of times you would see merchants with their scales.
Oh, absolutely.
And they would, you know, they would measure things out.
Yeah, well, they knew how much good silver coins weighed.
Right.
And so they would weigh the coinage up to make sure it balanced out to where you weren't trying to give them silver tainted by lead or gold tainted by lead or something of the sort. All right? So, or copper coins tainted by too much zinc or too much tin or something on that sort. So, I mean, a savvy merchant, you know, would know how to do that so they wouldn't get cheated. And that can be part of the economy of a game too, is to have, you know, what are thieves doing? You know, would a thief be like kind of like a con man trying to pass that off? You know, that's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah, walk into a trader with a pouch of goods. Well, he may not know the value of those goods. He can't. He may have appraising, but maybe he's not that good of appraising.
Yeah.
And he may not want to give you what you think it's worth, or what he knows he can get for it.
Well, yeah, a lot of
and it takes time. Maybe he's got to go someplace to exchange it, and he may not get the full value of it either.
Yeah, really, you know, a lot of it has to do with what a trader feels that they can get out of it farther down the road. You may think you have something valuable, but is it valuable enough to the people of this village or this small town for them to pay you for it? You know, what use is somebody's armor to a town that needs plows, or a town that needs horses, or a town that needs flour? You know, what use is that? Now, you know, specific pieces of metal can be, you know, steel can be worth a lot because you can always trade off steel and weaponry and things like that. Blacksmiths can always reforge those into other things.
Yeah.
But that's if you've got a skilled blacksmith. What good is it to people who, you know, who are starving, who need food, who need grain, who need wine, who need bread? You know, if you just show up with a bag full of miscellaneous arms and armor that you took from baddies. Okay, you know, kind of keep that in mind when you're trying to run an economy in a game. You know, that's kind of the reality of it. Of course, most games, of course, are fantasy. So how far do you want to go with fantasy? And we talked about that already, like how much a wand of healing would really be worth in our world right now.
Yeah, there's some real interesting fun facts that, you know, you take a wand of healing and how much is it really worth in
Yeah.
the real world, and it's worth, you know, tens of thousands of dollars.
Exactly.
You know, here's this 1,000 gold piece item, and it's worth tens of thousands of dollars in what would be real world money if you could actually had that item.
Right. You know, if say, for instance, in the medieval sort of world, something was worth 750 gold. All right, well, a wand may be worth that much, but you could probably buy an enormous chunk of land with a house on it and probably the bond of several servants for that much money.
Yeah.
So, in reality, you know, you're trying to talk about something that's just a magic item, and, you know, now's the time to start talking about the worth of magic items. Something that's a magic item with something that's a tangible product or a tangible good.
Right, and once again, the size of the location. Do you think a little village is going to have a magic shop? No. You know, you have a wizard that's cranking out plus one cloaks of protection. He's going to crash the economy.
Exactly. Exactly. What I mean, so in a high fantasy world, is money even really worth it? Because when you've got wizards who can make magic items, well, everybody's going to want a +2 cloak of protection if that's what the wizard's cranking them out the back door, a couple of them a week, and everybody's got one. Then are they worth it anymore to anybody? It's like, what cloak? You know, you showed up with a bunch of +2 cloaks of protection. Well, me and my kids have one. You know, we all got one. I mean, I can't give you anything for that. You know, I mean, it's kind of unrealistic when you think about that way. But it is a fantasy realm. So exactly how does, you know, that kind of monetary exchange way work in a realm?
Yeah.
So to give you an example, we've had things in our games where people wanted to buy horses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they want to, instead of just going down the stable, getting a horse for 50 silver or whatever, some people have wanted to role play that out. All right. And they want to barter about horses. Well, the thing is then they get really upset that when they go to the stables, the blacksmith doesn't have a war horse for them, a trained war horse.
Or he's asking 75% more for it because it's a valuable,
sure,
you know, piece of commodity that he's got.
To that village, a horse is worth a lot because it's rare. It's not something common. You know, back in the big city, there could be several horse traders, and you might be able to get one for cheap. But over here in the little village, and you want this trained war horse or even this big pack horse, they may charge you a lot of money because to them, that horse is worth a lot. It does a lot.
It pulls a plow. It
beast of burden.
Pulls the logs that they need after they cut them down for building the houses. And
it represents a huge investment because they've been feeding it for years.
Yeah. Pulls his cart when he's got to go to the bigger town to trade or get items that he needs.
Yeah. So, one thing I also want to talk about when it talks about this is, of course, is wealth, like capital, versus labor. And so, in kind of a medieval economy, most of the capital is centered around the king and the wealthy merchants. Okay, and then we have things from history where kings have borrowed a lot of money from wealthy merchants, and then, of course, a king will do it to finance a war, hoping that they'll be able to grab all the goods from all his captured knights and all those ransoms, and then they'll be able to use that money to repay the merchants, but then the war doesn't go so well.
Yeah. And
the king's deeply in debt to these merchants. And a lot of times that's when you've got kings such as the French kings deciding, well, you know, these merchants were actually foreign agents all along, and they're the ones who caused me to lose the war, so we're going to execute all of them. And that'll get rid of my debt. Yeah. So every once in a while, trading with the king can be pretty dangerous, like that. The king and the high level merchants have all the money. So what do the regular people have? Well, they have labor.
Yeah,
they have labor, and so they're the ones who are actually putting out the labor for making stuff. They're the ones who are making the cloth. They're plowing the land. They're picking the fruit. They're growing the wheat. They're providing all the services. They're the ones doing all that.
Well, we know, too, from real world that you have your noble who's got the keep, who's got all this land, and everyone works basically for him.
Exactly.
And he lets them live on his land and have some of the food for a tithe.
Sure, it's sort of like indentured servitude, in a lot of ways, where
Right.
you're bound to the land, and you're bound to the land, you're bound to the Lord, and you're born into it, you die into it, and in that time, your liege lord basically controls, all this land around. You don't really own much; they own it all, and essentially you're tied there because of your labor.
Right.
So, I don't know how far we've ever gone like that in our fantasy worlds with our plot lines.
We've never gone that far. That'd be an interesting plot line.
Yeah.
The king takes out the merchants because he's had a war with the orcs of the area, and he had to raise an army to take them out, or the neighboring kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And now the merchants are all gone, and he owns everything, and that'd be an interesting plot.
Well, it would be. I mean, could something like that, a royal-centered economy, work? Probably not, because of the complexities of trade and production. Yeah. A royal-centered command economy, I mean, you can force it to work as long as you, keep the money and stuff hyperinflated. The best example I can give right now is the Soviet Union. Eventually, it all just falls apart because it's all built on a big carpet of lies.
Yep.
We talked about barter. We've talked about capital and labor. One thing that we kind of wanted to bring up is cost of living, and how much it is for like beer or wine or food or lodging in villages around
Mm-hmm.
as you're traveling.
Yeah, because if you're living a destitute, you're basically not spending anything out every month. You're basically like a homeless person. You don't have much, and
Yeah.
you don't eat much food, but your health is going to go down when you're living in a destitute.
Well, if you're an adventuring party, okay, what do you do? Okay, most adventuring parties they're reliant on a village or a people to provide them food and lodging and something to drink.
Yeah.
Some kind of clothing, whatever. You're an adventuring party traveling through a land, and you come into a village. Well, it's like, well, we want to get a room for the night because we've been sleeping rough out in the land, around a campfire all day.
Do you want the common room? Do you want the
Yeah.
Do you want a regular room to share? Do you want the suite?
Do you want a pile of straw in the corner with a blanket? Do you want to sleep with the horses? Do you want the common swill? Do you want the nice wine? Is a tavern going to have good wine? They may have some wine, but they may not have the good stuff. Are they going to have moonshine? Maybe it's something that the wife makes.
One of my favorite things when you watch Black Sails, at the end of the night, they're going and taking all the cups,
Yep,
and putting them back in the pitcher for the next day.
For the next
what's
day.
left over.
I thought that was a really good touch.
Yeah.
In the morning, all the drunks are out there laying on the table, and they're going around dumping all the half-empty grogs back into the pitcher to sell it, to spike it back up for the next day. Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember doing that. We talked about that too.
Yeah.
So it's like value. It's a valuable commodity, so you don't throw it away.
Right.
You keep using it until it's all gone. So here's an interesting concept, and this is something that people may not know. Manufacturing gunpowder. You need sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter, maybe another couple ingredients. I'm not the biggest chemist person in the world, but I do know you need that kind of stuff.
Those are like the three biggest.
Yeah. So saltpeter, essentially, one way you can get that is through like breaking down urine. And the Italian people who manufactured gunpowder, when they learned the secret from the Chinese, people used to use horse urine, stuff like that, cow urine. But I remember reading where the defenders of Malta against the Saracens, I think, they were cut off from trade, but they needed to make gunpowder for their cannons. Now, this is probably 1500s here. What they did is, one thing they had was a lot of wine. So they had everybody drink a lot of wine and pee a lot. And then they would save all that urine to make saltpeter, to make gunpowder for their cannons. So in a sense, it's like you've got wine, which is a commodity, and then what you're peeing out in urine is also a commodity, that you can utilize.
Well, tanning.
Even
Tanning uses
it does use urine.
urine.
Yeah, tanning uses urine too. Uric acid. It can. It doesn't always, but it can use uric
That's why
acid.
they always stunk. They always said they stunk.
Tanneries
around
always
tanneries.
stunk horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. So, you know, when we talk about economies inside your game, it's always a component of role playing. It always is. Like how much money you can get, how much gold you end up with at the end. In Skyrim, I mean, both times I've played through that game, I've always ended up with over 1 million gold and nothing to do with it. There's nothing to do with all that gold.
Right.
You know, in Starfield right now, I'm approaching 750,000 credits. Well, I can buy a big starship, but it's better for me to build a starship than it is to buy one. You know, and when you're with your modification skills, and even in medieval games, your blacksmithing skills, why would you want to buy stuff when you can make it? You know, that's part of the game.
Yeah. And of course, if you are an adventurer trying to make these things, you're going to have to have a spot to do it. So you're going to have to rent out the blacksmith shop.
Yeah, or have, you know, like workbenches in your hab or whatever.
If you have bought a home or a small keep.
Yeah. So
yeah. And then, you know, of course you don't have to do economics in your game. That's totally up to you.
Yeah.
How complex you want to make it. You know, I do it not to the heavy side of it, but I do have it that if you want to buy something, you're going to pay X amount more than what a book says, and if you're trying to sell it, you're going to pay X amount. You're going to get X amount less than what it's listed in the books.
Yeah. The even exchange rate is just always kind of weird when it comes to D&D. I think a more realistic way to look at it is that you're not going to always get what you think you're supposed to get.
In the current campaign that I'm running, they're in a barbarian, it's very Norse Celtic environment, and the players have a ton of treasure that they've stashed and even equipment. And they wonder what they're going to do with that. And I keep telling them, I says, well, number one, when you go back to your Jarl, because he's your king, you've got to pay X amount.
Yeah.
And you'll get to keep X amount.
Yeah.
But then what is he going to do? He's probably going to turn around and make ships and do trade to help his land and his people and further himself or his family.
Yeah. You think that's what's going to happen. Okay. But there's also the concept of greed.
Yeah.
All right. So, and this is just another anecdote. Anybody who was the fan of the TV show Vikings remembers the first season when Ragnar Lothbrok fought and killed his Jarl so that he could take over Kattegat and become the Jarl. The previous Jarl buried his hoard somewhere out in the forest or whatever, and then killed everybody who knew where it was. And so when he died, that hoard is just stuck there.
It's gone.
It's gone.
So it makes you think in real world how they come across these hoards of treasure.
When they come across these hoards of treasure, that must have been what it was. Someone decided to go out and bury all their stuff. And then when they died, no one ever got it. You know, it's ridiculous when you think about it, but it doesn't go back into the economy. It just sits there like you hoard it like a big dragon, you know, like Smaug sitting on top of an incalculable amount of wealth.
The dwarves are like, mine.
Give it all back. And the dragon's like, this is mine. But what is the dragon going to buy? The dragon doesn't buy wine. It just sits there because he wants it. So that's the concept of greed and hoarding.
Right.
And, you know, those kind of things can destroy economies. I mean, truly destroy economies. I mean, look at the American South right before the Civil War. There was almost no money in circulation. And the banks a lot of times, you know, were really right on the edge of functioning because they were printing their own money. There wasn't a lot of wealth around.
Yep.
The people who actually owned everything were the few wealthy, and most of the southern farmers and even some traders really worked along the barter system again because that's the only way they could survive.
Yeah. So once again, to take upon that, you know, whether you have it realistic or fantasy, or you just do the easy peasy thing and just say, okay, here's what it is, boom, boom.
Yeah.
You know, you get tit for tat. But to me, that takes away some of the enjoyment of real world and
Well, sure it
barter
does,
and economy, and even a little bit of role playing.
Yeah, a lot of role playing, and like,
but not over the top where somebody wants to barter for the horse for 3 hours in a game.
Well, we've had that too. But Delaney's good on role playing, so that we always have stuff to where you have to try to barter a little bit and get a better deal. And of course, that comes from diplomacy and your roles and stuff like that. So that's part of it. But we wanted to talk about a lot of this, in the economic systems within games sometimes, because it always comes up whenever we get loot, whenever we're playing, and how much this loot is worth, and how much these magic items. And we always get the player, and this is a part of metagaming, also, we always get the player who wants to go down to the village. Well, is there a magic shop in the village? A magic shop? What are you talking about? Well, a place that sells wands. In this little village where there's, one inn, a blacksmith, you think there's a magic shop? A cooper maybe? A wheelwright? You think there's a magic shop?
A ton of farmers.
And it always ends up going into an argument. So, there you go. That's why we thought we'd bring it up.
So anyway, we're going to end this episode of economics, and we hope you like this episode, that you like, share, subscribe, spread the word, hit that bell, get notifications, comment. We reply to every comment, whether it's hey, thanks for commenting, or sometimes, I always try to even give a thumbs up on it, and I do the commenting. Well, Tom sometimes will say, well, hey, say this in that comment.
Yeah. But, even if you don't agree with what we're talking about, it's fine. Right. We listen to criticism too, so.
Right, we do.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for watching Wizards of the Tower.
Role play.
May all your adventures be epic.
And keep on rolling.
Thanks, folks.